Ethan Cole hauled back on the reins so hard his gelding screamed, because the sound carrying across the plain wasn't wind and wasn't coyote. It was a child screaming for her mama. He turned the horse, drove his heels in, and rode toward the worst day of somebody else's life, because Lord knows he'd already buried enough of his own. Before this story rides on, do me one kindness, hit that subscribe button. Stay with me till the very last word and drop the name of the city you're watching from down in the comments, so I can see how far this story has carried. Ethan Cole hadn't spoken a word out loud in 3 days, and he reckoned that suited him fine. He rode the long way around the old wagon road the way he'd ridden it every summer for 10 summers now, because the short way cut past a piece of ground he couldn't look at without feeling his chest cave in. There was a cottonwood out there, and under that cottonwood was a wooden cross he'd carved himself, and under that cross was the only woman he'd ever loved, and the only boy he'd ever called son. He didn't go that way anymore. He didn't even let his horse drink from the creek that ran past it. The sun that afternoon was the kind of sun that made a man hate God a little. It pressed down on the brim of his hat and pushed sweat through the back of his shirt and turned the air into something a body had to push through with its shoulders. The gelding Pilgrim was lathered white at the neck. Ethan loosened the reins and let him pick his own pace. "Easy now," he murmured. "Easy." That was the first time he'd used his voice since Tuesday. He was 3 miles from his own gate when the sound came. It was thin and it was high, and it stretched across the open country the way a knife stretches across silk. He pulled Pilgrim up. He listened. He told himself it was a hawk. He told himself it was the wind catching a fence wire. He told himself it was none of his business, and he had made a long career out of minding his own business, and a man who had buried his family did not owe one more thing to the world. The sound came again. This time, he heard the word in it. "Mama!" Ethan closed his eyes. For a long second, he just sat there, his hands gone soft on the reins, his jaw working like he was trying to chew through a piece of leather. "Damn it," he said. Then he kicked Pilgrim into a run. He came down off the rise and saw the wreck before he saw the child. A wagon lay tipped in the bottom of a dry wash, one wheel still spinning slow in the heat. A horse lay dead in the traces swollen up with the sun. Boxes and blankets and a busted churn were scattered across 30 yards of cracked dirt, like somebody had taken the family's whole life and shaken it out into the wash. Then he saw her. She stood between him and the wagon. Knees locked, both hands wrapped around the handle of a kitchen knife that had gone red with rust. Her dress had been blue once. Her hair had been brown once. The sun had taken the color out of both. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, and her face was burned raw across the cheekbones, and her bare feet were planted in the dirt like she'd put down roots there. Ethan reined up 20 paces back and held up one open hand. "Easy, little miss." "You stop right there," the girl shouted. Her voice cracked clean in half. "You stop right there, mister. I'm stopped. See, I'm stopped. You touch my mama, I'll kill you." He looked past her. There was a woman in the wagon shadow. She was on her side. She was not moving the way a living person moves. She was moving the way a person moves when they're already half gone, small twitches, no purpose to any of it. "All right," Ethan said. His voice had gone quiet the way a man's voice goes when he's coaxing a green horse. "All right, miss, I hear you. You go away, you hear me? I'm gonna get down off this horse real slow. No, I'm gonna get down and I'm gonna leave my gun on the saddle. You see this?" He unbuckled his belt with one hand, slow as a man pulling a thorn out of his own thumb, and hung the rig over the horn. "Guns up there. I ain't carrying nothing." "You stay back." "I'm staying back, miss. I swear it on my mother." He swung down. His knees popped. He was 41 years old, and some days he felt 60, and today was one of those days. He stood with both hands open at his sides and made himself small the way you do for a wounded animal. "What's your name, little miss?" "You don't ask me that." "All right, I won't ask. My name's Ethan, Ethan Cole. I got a place about 3 miles east of here. I'm a rancher. I ain't one of the men that done this. How do I know that? You don't, I reckon. You'll have to study on it. The knife was shaking in her hands. He saw the shaking, and his throat closed up so tight he had to look at the ground for a second to get past it. Maggie, she said. He looked up. What's that, miss? My name's Maggie, Maggie Whitfield. She lifted her chin. The knife stayed up. And that's my mama. Her name's Clara, and if she dies, mister, I'll dig her grave myself, and I'll lay down beside her, and you can leave us be. Maggie, he said it soft. Maggie, your mama ain't dying today. You don't know that. I know I'm gonna do everything I can so she don't. Now I'm gonna ask you something, and I want you to think about it real careful. You got water. The girl's mouth trembled. It got broke, she whispered. The jug got broke when the wagon turned. All right. He lifted his canteen off the saddle slow and held it out at arm's length. This here's mine. It's full. I want you to come take it. Don't you come close to me. You just step up, take it, and step back. Then you drink. Then you give your mama some. I ain't thirsty. Maggie, look at me. She looked at him. You are thirsty, he said. You are the thirstiest little girl in the Wyoming Territory, and your mama needs you walking, not falling down. So you come on now. Take the canteen. She came forward 2 steps, then 3. The knife stayed pointed at his belly. She snatched the canteen out of his hand and jumped back like he'd burned her. Drink, he said. She drank. She drank the way a child drinks who has forgotten what water tastes like. Some of it ran down her chin and made dark spots on the front of her dress. She coughed and drank again. Now your mama, Ethan said. She turned and ran to the wagon shadow. Ethan stayed where he was. He watched her kneel down, watched her tip the canteen against her mother's mouth, watched her pat the woman's cheek with a hand so small it broke something inside him he had thought was already broke past breaking. Mama, Mama, drink. Mr. Cole brung water. Mama, please. The woman made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was the sound a person makes when their body is trying to do a thing the soul has already left off. Maggie, Ethan called. Maggie, can I come closer? A long silence. Yes, sir. He walked. He kept his hands open. He came around the broke wagon and got his first proper look at Clara Whitfield, and he had to set his jaw hard because his knees wanted to give. There was blood on the front of her dress, dried black, and blood under her where she lay, and a smell coming off the wound that he knew from the war and from cattle and from his own boy before the end. He'd buried enough things to know that smell. He knelt down. He pressed 2 fingers under the woman's jaw. The pulse was there, thin, quick, wrong. Ma'am? He leaned close. Ma'am, can you hear me? Her eyes opened a slit. Maggie, she whispered. She's right here, ma'am. She's right here and she's all right. My name's Ethan Cole. I got a place a few miles from here. I aim to take you home and tend that wound. Maggie, Clara whispered again. Mama, I'm here. I'm here. Ethan looked up at the sky. It was the color of beat copper. He looked at the wagon. He looked at the dead horse. Then he looked past the wagon and he saw the second body, and he understood why the child had picked up a rusty knife. A man lay face down on the far side of the wash. He had been shot in the back. The flies had found him already. Maggie, Ethan said. That's my papa. I see him, miss. His name was Samuel. Samuel Whitfield. He told them they could have the money. He told them, mister, he begged them, and they shot him anyhow. And then they dragged Mama out and... Maggie. And they shot Mama too, and they laughed. Mister, they was laughing. Maggie. She stopped. Her chin shook. Her whole face shook. She did not cry. He noticed that. He marked it down somewhere inside himself. The child had not cried. You done good, he said. You hear me? You done good. You stood right here, and you guarded your mama, and you held that knife, and you didn't run. Your papa would be proud of you. He's dead. Yes, miss. He's dead, and we got to bury him. Miss. We got to bury him, Mr. Cole. You promise. You promise me. Ethan swallowed. Maggie, your mama's gonna die in 2 hours if I don't get her out of this sun and get her wound cleaned. I can't dig your papa a grave today. The ground here's hard as a wagon wheel, and I ain't got the time. Then we ain't going? Maggie? We ain't leaving him. We ain't. Papa hated the dark. Papa hated being alone, and he hated the dark. And we ain't gonna leave him out here alone in the dark for the coyotes. She was breathing too fast now. The knife dropped out of her hand and hit the dirt. Ethan reached and caught her by the shoulders, and she did not fight him. She was so light. She weighed nothing. She weighed less than the saddle blanket on his horse. He held her there a second, just held her, and his hands were shaking. Listen, he said. Listen to me, Maggie Whitfield. I am gonna make you a promise, and a man's promise is the only thing he owns out here. You hear me? Yes, sir. I am gonna take your mama home, and I am gonna stitch that wound, and I am gonna come back here tomorrow morning at first light, and I am gonna dig your papa a grave so deep no coyote in the territory will ever find him. I'm gonna mark it with a cross. I'm gonna say words over him. And when your mama can sit a horse, I'll bring you both back here, and you can say goodbye proper. You hear me, Maggie? Yes, sir. You believe me? She looked at him a long, long time. The sun was sliding down behind her. She studied his face the way old women study a man come courting, looking for the lie under the words. Yes, sir, she whispered. I believe you. All right, now you help me. Can you help me, Maggie? Yes, sir. Get me that blanket yonder, and hurry, miss, hurry. She ran like a deer. He worked fast then. He cut Clara's dress away from the wound with his pocket knife, and he poured the last of the canteen over it, and he packed it with strips of clean cotton he'd torn from the underside of his own shirt. The woman cried out once. Maggie heard it. Maggie was at his elbow in a heartbeat, holding her mama's hand, whispering things he didn't catch. You're hurting her. I know it, miss, I know. You're hurting her, mister. I am Maggie. And if I don't, she dies. You understand. The little girl pressed her forehead against her mother's forehead. Mama, it's all right. Mama, the man's helping. Mama, please, you gotta let him. Ethan tied off the bandage. He sat back on his heels and wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist. His hand was red. He wiped it on his pants. All right, he said. All right. We're gonna get her up on Pilgrim. He's a good horse. He's gentle. You ever rode behind a man before, Maggie? No, sir. Well, you're fixin' to. You're gonna ride behind me, and you're gonna hold on tight to the back of my coat, and you ain't gonna let go for nothing. Your mama's gonna ride in front of me, and I'm gonna hold her up. We clear? Yes, sir. You ain't scared of horses? No, sir. Good girl. He got Clara up. It took everything he had. The woman didn't weigh much, but dead weight is dead weight, and the wound made her cry out twice, and Maggie made a sound like a small animal each time. He set Clara across the saddle in front of his place and swung up behind her. He held her against his chest with his left arm. All right, Maggie, step up on that rock. Reach for my hand. She climbed up like she'd done it 100 times. He pulled her up behind him. Her legs were too short to reach the stirrups. She had to grip with her knees the way a child grips a fence rail. Hold on now. She wrapped both arms around him from behind and pressed her face into the back of his coat. That was when it happened. That was when Ethan Cole, who had not let one solitary human being touch him in 10 years, who had slept alone and eaten alone and ridden alone and grieved alone, felt a child's arms close around his ribs from behind, felt a small forehead press into the leather between his shoulder blades, and felt every wall he had spent a decade building crack right down the middle. He could not breathe for a second. He gripped the saddle horn so hard his knuckles cracked. Mr. Cole, what is it, miss? His voice was a stranger's voice. You're shaking. I know it. Are you scared? Yes, miss, I reckon I am. Why? He did not answer her. He could not. He turned Pilgrim east and clucked his tongue, and the horse stepped out careful, and behind him, a 6-year-old girl pressed her face into his coat and held on like he was the last thing in the world. The sun was bleeding out across the plain by then, going red and going low, and Clara's breath was hitching against his chest, and Maggie was murmuring something behind him he couldn't quite hear. He bent his ear back. She was praying. "And bless Mama, and bless Papa where he is, and bless the man who come. His name is Mr. Cole, Lord. Please don't let him be one of the bad ones, please, Lord, please." Ethan's eyes burned. He blinked hard and stared at the country in front of him. "Maggie," he said. "Yes, sir." "I ain't one of the bad ones." "No, sir." "I want you to know that. I want you to know that for sure." "Yes, sir." "My wife's name was Sarah. My boy's name was Thomas. They been gone 10 years come September. I ain't had nobody to be good for in a long time, Maggie. I done forgot how. But I am gonna remember. You hear me? I am gonna remember for you and your mama. You got my word on that." She was quiet a long moment. "Mr. Cole?" "Yes, miss. My papa was good too." "I'm sure he was, Maggie. He sang to me." "Yes, miss. He sang me a song about a river." Ethan rode with his jaw locked tight and did not trust his voice. The ranch came up out of the dusk, the old cabin he'd built with Sarah, the barn he'd raised the year Thomas was born, the pasture where he ran his small herd. There were no lights in any window. There hadn't been a light in any window of that cabin in 10 years. He'd lived it that way on purpose. He rode up to the porch and reined Pilgrim in. "All right," he said. "We're home." Maggie did not move. Her arms stayed locked around his ribs. "Maggie, we're here, miss. You can let go." She did not let go. "Mr. Cole?" "Yes, miss." "Is this where you live?" "It is." "Is it safe?" He looked out across his own land in the dying light. He looked at the long road that ran up to his gate. He thought about the men who had shot Samuel Whitfield in the back. He thought about a wealthy woman in St. Louis, whose name he didn't yet know, but whose money had already reached out across half a country to put a hole in this child's mother. He thought about how a man saves 2 lives and inherits the whole war that came after them. "It's safe tonight, Maggie," he said. "Just tonight. Tonight's all I'm promising, miss. Tonight's all any of us got." He swung down with her still clinging to his back, and he carried her and her dying mother through the door of a house that had not held a living family in 10 long summers. And he kicked the door shut behind them, and somewhere out on the dark plain, the first coyote of the night began to sing. He laid Clara down on the bed that had been Sarah's bed, and his hands knew what to do before his head caught up. He'd nursed his wife through 3 fevers in this same room, and he'd lost her on the 4th, and a man's hands. Remember what his heart tries to forget. "Maggie, I need you to do something for me." "Yes, sir." "There's a kettle by the stove. Fill it from the pump out back. Both buckets. Can you carry 'em?" "Yes, sir." "Then go." She went. Ethan tore Sarah's old quilt off the cedar chest, the one he hadn't opened in 10 years, and the smell of her came up out of it and hit him in the chest like a fist. He stood there 1 second with his hand on the lid. Then he shut it. He spread the quilt over Clara and pressed his palm to her forehead. "Lord," he said, "don't you take this one. You took mine. Don't you take this child's mama too." Clara stirred. "Samuel." "No, ma'am." "Samuel where?" "Ma'am, you rest. You just rest now. My baby." "She's right outside. She's fetching water. She's safe." Clara's eyes rolled back under her lids and her breath caught, and for 1 second, Ethan thought he'd lost her right there in his hands. He pressed his ear to her chest. The heart was still going. Just barely. Maggie came through the door, dragging a bucket twice her size, and water sloshed out the rim, and her face was set hard like a woman 3 times her age. "Mr. Cole?" "Set it by the stove, miss." "Mr. Cole, is she?" "She's breathing, Maggie. She's breathing." "You promised." "I know I did." "You promised she ain't dying today." "And she ain't?" The girl stood in the middle of the room with her empty hands at her sides, and her chin started doing the thing again, the trembling thing, but no tears came. Ethan watched her. He had seen grown men come back from the war with that same look, The look of a body whose tears had been used up and put away and forgot about. "Maggie, come here." She came. "Sit down on that stool. Right there. You look at your mama. You look at her chest. You see it going up and down." "Yes, sir?" "That's all you got to do tonight. You count them breaths. Every one of them. You hear me? You count, and you don't stop counting, and your mama's gonna keep right on breathing because you're keeping count. That's your job, Maggie Whitfield." "What if I lose count?" "You won't." "What if I do?" "Then you start over. There ain't no wrong way to keep a person breathing." She sat. She fixed her eyes on her mother's chest. She started to count under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ethan worked through the night. He boiled water and tore a clean shirt into strips and packed the wound and changed the dressing. Twice and twice the bandage came away soaked through, and the second time he saw the color of what was coming out, and he set his jaw, and he started over. Around midnight, Clara began to shake. "Mr. Cole." "I see it, miss." "She's shaking, mister, she's shaking real bad." "It's the fever breaking, or it's the fever winning. We're gonna find out together." "Don't say that." "Maggie." "Don't you say that." "Maggie, look at me." The girl looked at him. Her face was white as the bedsheet. "You keep counting. You hear me? You keep counting and I'll do the rest." "Yes, sir." 1, 2, 3. "Yes, sir, I know." He poured whiskey into the wound. Clara screamed. It was a thin scream, a half scream, the scream of a person who had nothing left to scream with, and Maggie made a sound at her mother's bedside that Ethan would carry to his grave. "It's all right, miss. It's all right. It's the bad coming out." "Mama, Mama, please." 83, 84, Ethan said. "What? You lost count. I've been keeping it for you. 84, 85. Pick it up, Maggie." She picked it up. 86, 87, 88. The shaking went on for an hour. Then it stopped. Clara's breathing slowed, evened out, deepened. Ethan pressed 2 fingers to her throat and held them there a long time. "Maggie." "Yes, sir." "She's through it." The girl did not say anything. "Maggie, you hear me, miss? She's through. The fever broke. She's gonna live to see morning." The little girl slid down off the stool and onto the floor like her bones had gone out from under her. She crawled to the side of the bed and laid her cheek against her mother's hand, and she stayed like that, and she still did not cry. Ethan sat down in the chair across the room and put his face in his hands. He did not cry either, but for the first time in 10 years, he wanted to. Morning came gray and slow. Ethan was up before the light. He saddled Pilgrim and got 2 shovels out of the barn and rode back the way he'd come alone. Because he had given a child his word, and a man's word was the only thing he owned out here. He buried Samuel Whitfield where he'd fallen. He dug deep enough that no coyote would ever know the man had been there. He laid the body straight and folded the cold hands across the chest and covered him with the dirt of the wash. He cut a piece of broken wagon board into a cross with his hatchet and drove it into the ground at the head. Then he stood there with his hat in his hand. "Samuel Whitfield," he said. "I never met you, but your little girl held a knife on me yesterday and told me she'd kill me if I touched her mama. And mister, I tell you, you raised her right. She held that knife steady. She didn't run. You'd have been proud." He stood a minute. "I aim to look after them. I don't know yet what that means. I expect to find out. But I want you to know I ain't taking your place. A man can't take a dead man's place. He can only stand in the gap till the dead man's wife and child can stand on their own. That's what I aim to do, Samuel. That's all I aim to do." He set his hat back on his head. "You rest easy, mister." He rode home. 3 days went by, and Clara slept through most of them. She woke twice, once to ask for Maggie, and once to say a name Ethan didn't catch, and then she slipped under again. Maggie did not speak. Not to him, not to her mother, not to anyone. She ate when he set food in front of her. She drank when he poured water. She sat by the bed for hours at a stretch holding her mama's hand, and her lips would move sometimes, but no sound came out. On the second day, Ethan found her in the barn. "Maggie." She didn't turn around. "Maggie, what are you doing out here, miss?" She was crouched by the feed bin. There was a dog there, a scrawny brown thing, half coyote by the look of it, that had been hanging around the place for a month. Ethan had been meaning to run it off. Maggie had a piece of cornbread in her hand. She was holding it out. "That dog'll bite, miss." "No, he won't." The first word she'd spoken in 2 days. Ethan stood real still. "How do you know Maggie?" "He's scared. Scared things don't bite if you're slow." "That's so." "My papa told me." The dog took the bread out of her hand and slunk back under the feed bin. "Maggie." "Yes, sir?" "You want to keep him?" She turned her head and looked at Ethan for the first time in 2 days. "Can I—" "It's your dog, miss. If he'll have you." She looked back at the dog. The dog looked back at her. "His name's Boots," she said. "All right, Boots it is." That night, for the first time, Maggie ate at the table with him. She didn't say grace. She didn't say much of anything. But she sat in the chair across from him, and she ate the beans he'd put on her plate, and when she was done, she said, "Thank you, Mr. Cole." And she carried her plate to the wash basin without being asked. Ethan sat at the table a long time after she went up to bed. Then he went out to the barn. He hadn't been in the back stall in 10 years. He'd locked it from the inside the day he'd buried Sarah and Thomas, and he'd never opened it since. He took the key off the nail where it had hung untouched and turned the lock and pushed the door. There it was. The cradle he'd carved with his own hands the winter Sarah told him she was carrying. Cottonwood. Smooth as a creek stone. One of the rockers was busted from where he'd put his boot through it the night they died. He stood there a long time. Then he picked it up and carried it into the cabin and got out his tools. He was hammering the new rocker on at 2 in the morning when he heard a voice behind him. "What are you fixing, Mr. Cole?" He turned. Clara Whitfield was standing in the bedroom doorway. She was hanging onto the frame with one hand. Her face was the color of paper, but her eyes were open and they were on him. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be up." "What are you fixing?" He looked down at the cradle in his hands. "I don't rightly know, ma'am." "It's a cradle." "Yes, ma'am." "Whose—" He set the hammer down. "My boy's. Thomas. He's been gone 10 years. Clara was quiet a long time. "How old was he?" 2 months, ma'am." "And your wife?" "Her too. Same week. Cholera come through the territory that summer. Took half the families on this stretch." Clara took 2 unsteady steps and lowered herself onto the bench by the table. "Mr. Cole." "Yes, ma'am." "Why are you fixing it?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." He looked at her. She looked at him. "Ma'am, you've been awake, 10 minutes? You ought to be in bed." "You answer my question." "I don't have an answer." "Mr. Cole, why are you fixing it?" He set both hands flat on the table. "Because there's a child sleeping in my house, ma'am, and I don't know yet what that means, but I know a child needs things, and I had things, and I put them away, and I reckon it's time to take them out." Clara closed her eyes. "Mr. Cole, there's something I have to tell you." "It can wait till morning, ma'am." "It can't." "Ma'am, my name is Clara Ashford Whitfield. Ashford. My mother is Eleanor Ashford, of St. Louis." Ethan's hand stopped moving on the table. "That name's supposed to mean something to me, ma'am." "In Missouri it does. In Kansas it does. My mother owns half the freight lines between here and the Mississippi, and the men she doesn't own outright, she owns by debt or by rumor." "All right. My husband Samuel was a clerk in her counting house. We fell in love. She forbade it. We ran. She told us if we ran, she'd see us begging in the street inside a year. Samuel said he'd rather beg with me than dine with her." Ethan watched her. "Mr. Cole, I need you to hear what I'm about to say." "I'm hearing you, ma'am." "The men who came to our wagon, they didn't come for water. They didn't come for our supplies." "Then what'd they come for?" "They came for Maggie." The cabin went quiet. "Ma'am, you sure about that? My father died last spring. He left his estate not to my mother. He left it to me, and after me to Maggie. My mother contested. The court found in our favor. The papers came through 3 weeks before we left for Wyoming. How much, ma'am? $80,000 in gold, Mr. Cole, plus the freight company shares, plus the house in St. Louis, plus the land in Iowa. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. That's a fortune, ma'am. It's more than a fortune. It's a kingdom, and whoever has guardianship of Maggie has the running of it until she's grown. Ma'am, you telling me your own mother sent men to— I'm telling you, my mother sent men to make Maggie an orphan. I'm telling you they were paid to leave nobody alive who could speak against her in a custody court. Ethan stood up so fast the bench scraped. Lord God. Mr. Cole. Lord God, ma'am, and you didn't see fit to mention this when I rode in with you bleeding out across my saddle. I was unconscious. Then yesterday, or this morning, or any time in the last 3 days that ain't 2 o'clock in the morning. I just woke up. You knew enough to come out here and ask me about a cradle, ma'am. You knew enough to tell me your name's not Whitfield. My name is Whitfield. Samuel gave me that name. I earned it. Then why didn't you tell me, ma'am? Why didn't you? Because— her voice broke. Because every man who has ever known about that money has looked at me different the next morning. Every one. My uncles. My cousins. Samuel's own brother. I watched the light change in their eyes, Mr. Cole. I watched them go from wanting to help me to wanting to handle me, and I will not let that happen with you. Not yet. Not while I still don't know what kind of man you are. Ma'am, I am the kind of man who pulled you out of a wash and stitched a bullet hole shut at 3 in the morning. Yes. And the kind who doesn't take kindly to being lied to in his own house. I didn't lie. You held back. I held back. Yes. That's a kind of lie, ma'am. She put her face in her hands. Yes, it is. I'm sorry. He paced the length of the cabin. He came back. He paced again. 80,000 in gold. Yes. And your mother. Yes. And she's gonna come for that little girl. She already has. He stopped. What do you mean she already has? Mr. Cole, those men weren't the first. They were the third try. There was a fire at our house in St. Louis in March. There was a man in the alley outside the bank in April. And then the wagon. She is methodical, my mother. She does not stop. She will not stop. Then we don't stop neither. You don't understand. I understand fine, ma'am. I understand a 6-year-old slept under my roof tonight. I understand what's coming for her. I understand the rest. Mr. Cole, this is not your fight. Ma'am. You don't have to. Ma'am, with all respect, you hush a minute. She hushed. I had a wife. I had a son. They got took. And I stood by their grave for 10 years, and I told myself I'd never put my hand on something else the world could come and take again. That was my plan, ma'am. That was my whole plan for the rest of my life. Mr. Cole, and then a little girl pointed a rusty knife at me yesterday and told me she'd kill me if I touched her, mama, and ma'am, I have been a dead man walking for a decade, and that little girl looked me in the eye and she put me back in the world. Clara pressed her hand against her mouth. So you can keep your $80,000 in gold, Ethan said, and you can keep your mother's freight lines and your house in St. Louis and your land in Iowa. I don't want any of it. I don't want 1 penny. But that little girl upstairs is going to grow up, and she is going to grow up safe. And the woman who is trying to make her an orphan is going to have to come through me to do it. And ma'am, I am a hard man to come through. I believe you. Good. Mr. Cole. Ma'am. Thank you. He looked away. Get back in bed, Mrs. Whitfield. Yes, sir? She went. He stood at the table a long time, staring at the half-fixed cradle. Then he went to the door, and he opened it, and he stepped out onto the porch, and the night air came up cold off the plain, and he stood there with his hands flat on the porch rail, and breathed, and breathed, and breathed. 3 days later, the rider came. Ethan saw him first. A black coat at the gate, a black hat, a polished bay horse that had no business being on a working ranch. He told Maggie to go upstairs. He told Clara to stay in the bedroom. He stepped out onto the porch with his rifle in the crook of his arm and waited. The rider tipped his hat. "Mr. Cole, I presume?" "You presume right." "My name is Gideon Price, attorney at law, out of St. Louis." "I figured." "Then you know why I'm here." "I got an idea." The man dismounted. He was tall and thin and had a face like a sheet of clean writing paper. Nothing on it that hadn't been put there on purpose. "Mr. Cole, I have papers." "I figured that too." "A petition for custody of Margaret Whitfield on the grounds that her mother, Clara Ashford Whitfield, is mentally unfit, and her present guardian, that would be yourself, sir, is a man with a documented history of violence." "That's so. There was a saloon, Mr. Cole, in Laramie, 8 years ago. A man named McCready. You broke his jaw in 3 places. He had it coming." "That may well be. The court is not interested in what he had coming. The court is interested in a sworn deposition which I have from 3 witnesses that you struck him without warning." "Without warning?" "Yes, sir. He'd just told me my dead wife should have stayed in the kitchen where she belonged." Gideon Price smiled. "I am sure that is a tragic personal detail, Mr. Cole. The court will not find it relevant." "Mr. Price." "Yes. You take them papers and you fold them up nice and you put them back in your saddlebag and you ride out the way you come. Mr. Cole, I am regrettably not the only party in this matter. Mrs. Ashford has retained men, many men. The papers are a courtesy. The hearing is in Cheyenne in 21 days. You will appear. So will Mrs. Whitfield. So will the child. If you do not appear, the child will be taken by force, and you, sir, will be taken with her in irons." "That a threat, Mr. Price?" "That is the law, Mr. Cole." Ethan stepped down off the porch. "Mr. Price?" "Yes." "You ever met a man you couldn't buy?" "I have met very few, Mr. Cole. The ones I have met, I have generally found ways to ruin." "Then you ain't met one yet." Gideon Price studied him a long moment. Then he tipped his hat again. "A man with a gun," he said, "often mistakes himself for a judge." "And a man with papers," Ethan said, "often mistakes himself for the law. We'll see which of us is right, Mr. Cole. In Cheyenne, 21 days. He mounted his horse. He turned it. He rode out. Ethan stood in the yard with the rifle still in the crook of his arm and watched the black coat get smaller and smaller against the road. Behind him, the screen door creaked. "Mr. Cole?" He didn't turn. "Get back inside, ma'am." "Mr. Cole, I heard him." "I said get back inside." There was a long quiet, then a smaller voice from up at the loft window. "Mr. Cole." "Yes, Maggie." "Is the bad lady coming?" He closed his eyes. He opened them. He turned around and he looked up at the loft window where a 6-year-old child was watching him with both her hands flat against the glass, and he made his voice as steady as he had ever made it in his whole life. "She's coming, miss," he said. "But she ain't getting through this door." He stood in the yard a long time after the loft window closed, and when he came back inside, Clara was standing at the foot of the stairs with one hand on the banister and the other pressed flat against her side, where the wound was still healing. "Mr. Cole?" 21 days, ma'am?" "Yes." "That ain't much time." "No, sir, it ain't." He laid the rifle across the table. He did not look at her. "Ma'am, I need you to ride with me into town tomorrow." "I can't sit a horse yet." "Then we take the wagon." "Mr. Cole, what are you fixing to do?" "What I should have done the day I brought you home, ma'am. I'm fixing to make us a wall." By the next afternoon, Reverend Amos Reed was sitting at Ethan's table with his Bible across his knees, and Mrs. Abigail Turner was setting bread on the stove like she'd done it 1,000 times, and old Nathaniel Boone, the only lawyer this side of Cheyenne who would still take Ethan Cole's hand when he met him on the street, was reading Gideon Price's papers with a face that got harder line by line. "Ethan, Nate, this here is a hanging document. How's that? It's wrote so a judge can't read it but one way. Says the woman is unstable. Says you are violent. Says the child belongs in the only home where money will keep her safe. They put it just like that, you understand. Money will keep her safe, like the child is a heifer. Can you fight it? I can fight it. I can't promise to win it. Clara, from her chair by the wall, spoke up. Mr. Boone? Mrs. Whitfield. What do we need? We need witnesses, ma'am. Folks who can speak to your character. Folks who can speak to Mr. Coles. And we need a child who can stand in a courtroom and say where her home is. The court won't take her word as final, but it weighs heavy. Maggie ain't talking to no judge. She'll have to, ma'am. She ain't said 10 words to me in 2 weeks. Then we got 21 days to get her to 20. The Reverend cleared his throat. I'll speak for the child and for the mother. I've been to this house. I've seen her sing the little one to sleep. I'll swear to it on any Bible the territory cares to put under my hand. Mrs. Turner. The storekeeper set the bread knife down. That child come into my store last Thursday, Mr. Boone, with Mr. Cole. She picked out a ribbon and she give it back, said it was too dear. Mr. Cole bought it anyhow and put it in her hair. She smiled. I have known Ethan Cole 11 years, and that was the first time I ever saw him look at another living soul like he wanted them to keep on living. I'll say so in court. I'll say so to the governor if you ask me. Ethan looked at the floor. All right, Boone said. We gotta start. It was that night the first thing went wrong. Maggie woke screaming. Ethan was up the loft ladder in 4 steps. Clara was right behind him, slow and panting, one hand pressed to her side. The little girl was sitting up in the bed, with her knees drawn against her chest, and Boots the dog wedged tight against her hip, and her eyes were not open. They were not closed either. They were somewhere in between the way eyes look when a body's seeing something the rest of the room can't. Maggie. Maggie, miss you. Wake up now. He's coming through the window. There ain't nobody at the window, miss. He's coming through the window, Mr. Cole. He's got the knife, he's got Papa's knife. Maggie? He's coming. Ethan caught her shoulders, held them firm. Maggie Whitfield, you look at me, miss. Her eyes focused. You're at the ranch. You're in the loft. The window is shut. Boots is right here. Your mama is on the stairs. There ain't nobody coming through nothing tonight. Mr. Cole. I'm right here. She fell against his chest. The dog pressed in. Clara made it up the last step, and she sat down on the floor by the bed because her legs would not hold her, and she put her hand on her daughter's back, and Maggie shook and did not cry. Clara looked up at Ethan over the child's head. She's seen the men's faces, Clara whispered. When they shot Samuel, she's seen 'em, Mr. Cole. I know it, ma'am. She's gonna see 'em every night the rest of her life. Not every night, ma'am. You don't know that. No, ma'am, I don't. But I aim to be here for as many of 'em as I can. It was about then Boots growled. The dog had its head up and its ears flat, and it was looking past Ethan's shoulder at the loft window. The shutter was closed. Ethan went still. Clara. Yes. Take Maggie down the ladder. Now. Quiet. Ethan. Now, ma'am. She didn't argue. She picked her daughter up out of the bed, and she carried her down that ladder, one rung at a time, with a hole in her side, and Ethan would remember the look of it for the rest of his life. He blew out the lamp. He stood in the dark loft and listened. Out past the shutter boot on gravel. One man, maybe two. He drew the pistol he kept on the loft sill. He waited. A voice low. Right outside the wood. You see anything? No, the dog's barking. Could be a coyote. Could be the kid woke up. We wait. How long? Till the lamp goes out downstairs. Ethan's blood went cold. He went down the ladder backwards slow, the gun pointed up at the shutter the whole way. Clara had Maggie at the kitchen table. Both of them were white as paper. How many? Clara whispered. 2 outside. Could be more. Mr. Cole? Hush. He blew out the kitchen lamp. Then he stood at the door and waited. The footsteps came up onto the porch. The door handle turned. Ethan Cole had a rifle in his hands and 41 years of grief in his bones, and when that door cracked open, he did not give a warning and he did not give a shout. He just put his shoulder against it and rammed it back the other way, and the man on the far side took the door full in the face and went down off the porch like a sack of feed, and the second man got off one shot that punched a hole through the wall above Maggie's head before Ethan put a bullet in his shoulder and a boot on his chest and held him down in the dirt. "How many of you out there?" The man spat blood. "Go to hell, Cowboy." "How many?" "2. "You're lying." "2. "You answer me right, or I put one in your knee." "2. "There's 2. "You got us both, you crazy son of a—" Ethan pistol whipped him into silence. He stood up. His ears were ringing, his hands were shaking. Behind him in the cabin, he could hear Clara breathing too fast, and Maggie not breathing at all, and the dog growling steady and low. Then very small from inside the cabin. "Mr. Cole." "Yes, miss." "Did you kill the bad men?" "No, miss. I just took their teeth out." "Are there more?" He looked out across the yard. The moon was up. The plain stretched flat and silver to the horizon. There was no movement out there. None he could see. None he could hear. "Not tonight," he said. But he was wrong. The third man had not come through the door. The third man had come through the loft window. Ethan and Clara and Maggie spent that night in the kitchen. The three of them in chairs pulled close, the dog at Maggie's feet, the rifle across Ethan's knees. Clara would not let Maggie out of her arms. Maggie would not let go of the dog. The dog would not stop growling at the staircase. But Boots was a half-coyote stray that growled at most things, and Ethan did not know what he was hearing. He should have known. He found out at first light. He went up the ladder to check the loft. He was thinking he'd nail the shutter down. He was thinking he'd put a board across the window. He was thinking they had survived the worst night of the whole 21 days, and now they could get to Cheyenne and put it before a judge. He came up the ladder, and he saw the shutter. It was open. It was not just open. It was cut. There was a fresh nick in the latch where somebody had pried it from outside slow and careful while Boots was downstairs growling at the wrong door. The bed was empty. The bed was empty, and the blanket was on the floor, and the rag doll Maggie slept with was lying open-eyed on the pillow, with a piece of paper pinned to its chest with a hat pin. Ethan stood there one long second and could not move. Then he came down that ladder, and his voice was a thing he didn't recognize. "Clara." "What?" "Clara." She came running. She made it 3 steps before she saw his face. "No." "Clara." "No, no, 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 no." "She's gone. She was right here. She was sleeping on my arm. She was right here." "Clara. Listen. There was a third man. He took her out the loft. While we were down here with the other 2. The whole thing was a draw, ma'am, the whole thing." Clara made a sound he would never be able to describe. It was not a scream. It was a sound he had heard one other time in his life, 10 years before, when he had carried his own son out of the cabin wrapped in a blanket. It was the sound a mother makes when the world rips her open from collarbone to knee. He caught her before she hit the floor. "Clara. Clara, look at me. Look at me. I am going to get her back. They took my baby. I am going to get her back. They took my baby." Clara. Clara Ashford Whitfield. She looked at him. Her face was wrecked. "I gave you my word about your husband, and I kept it. I am giving you my word about your daughter. Do you hear me?" "Yes." "Read me the note." She took the paper out of his hand. Her hands were shaking so bad the words moved on the page. "Withdraw the petition. Sign over guardianship. Or bury another child by Sunday. Cheyenne. The Drovers Hotel. Sunday." "Yes." "That's 3 days, Mr. Cole. 3 days. That's 3 days more than they meant to give us, ma'am. That means they want her alive long enough to make you sign, which means we got time, which means we ride. I can't sit a horse. You're gonna sit one anyway." He saddled Pilgrim. He saddled the spare mare. He left the 2 men he'd shot tied to the porch posts for Sheriff Briggs to find when Briggs came out, which Briggs would, because Ethan had sent a boy from the next ranch over, riding for him at sunup. He left a note. He left Boots in the barn with food. Then he rode. Clara rode beside him with her teeth set against the pane, and she did not speak for the first 8 miles. The 8th mile was when the wound started bleeding through the dressing. Ethan stopped, packed it again, and put her back in the saddle. "Ethan?" "Yes, ma'am." "What if they kill her before we get there?" "They won't." "What if they do?" "Then I will follow your mother to the gates of hell, ma'am, and I will pull her through them by the hair. But she won't kill that child." Eleanor Ashford did not spend 3 years and 3 attempts to make Maggie Whitfield her ward just to put her in the ground. That child is the key to the money. Your mother needs her alive till you sign. "And after I sign?" He looked over at her. "You ain't signing." "What if I have to?" "You ain't signing, because we're getting her back before any paper goes anywhere near your hand." They rode through the heat of the day, and into the dusk, and through most of the night, and they came down out of the long pull into Cheyenne, about 2 hours before dawn on the 2nd day, and Ethan Cole reined Pilgrim up at the edge of town, and looked across at Clara Whitfield in the gray light, and saw a woman who was not the woman he had pulled out of a wash 3 weeks before. The woman in the wash had been a victim. The woman beside him now was a mother who had ridden 100 miles with a hole in her side. "Mrs. Whitfield." "Yes?" "Your mother is going to expect us to come through the front door." "Yes." "She's going to have men in the lobby, men on the stairs, men in the hall." "Yes." "So we ain't going through the front?" "No, sir. There is a service entrance at the back of the drovers. It opens into the kitchen. There is a back stair. It runs up to the 3rd floor." "How do you know that?" "Because I worked the cattle drive that ended at the drovers in '68, ma'am, and I drank in that kitchen for 2 nights running. I know that hotel. I know which boards creak." "Ethan?" "Yes." "Take me to the kitchen door." The plan was simple, and it was bad, and it was the only plan they had. Ethan would walk through the front. He would make a noise. He would draw every man Eleanor Ashford had paid down to the lobby. Clara would go up the back. She would get her daughter. They would meet at the alley behind the hotel. "Clara?" "Yes." "You can't shoot." "I can shoot." "You ain't never shot a man." "I ain't never had a daughter took neither. There's a first time for everything, Mr. Cole." He gave her his second pistol. "Aim low, pull slow. Don't think about it after." "I won't." She went. He gave her 4 minutes by the watch he carried in his vest pocket. Then he walked up the boardwalk to the front of the Drovers Hotel, and he pushed through the doors, and he walked into the lobby of the finest establishment in Cheyenne, with his hat low and his coat open, and a Colt on each hip, and the night clerk took one look at him and rang the brass bell on the counter twice fast. 3 men stood up out of the lobby chairs. "Boys," Ethan said. "Mr. Cole." "Where is she?" "Mrs. Ashford is not receiving." "I ain't asking for Mrs. Ashford." "The child is not your concern." "That child is the only concern I got." "You are advised to turn around, sir." "I'm advised wrong." The first man drew. He was not fast enough. Ethan put a bullet through the meat of his shoulder before the gun cleared the holster, and he was already moving sideways before the second man got his iron up, and the second man's shot went wild and broke a glass lamp off the wall, and then Ethan was behind a column, and the third man was shouting up the stairs in a language that wasn't English, and somewhere up on the 2nd floor, a woman's voice cried out a single sharp word: "Maggie, Clara." Ethan grinned with no humor in it at all. "Come on, boys," he said. "Come and earn your dollar." He drew them in. He drew them down the lobby, then back up it, then into the dining room. He took a bullet through the meat of his left arm and did not slow down. He took a second through his side that scraped a rib and made him gasp, and he kept moving. He emptied one Colt and drew the second and kept moving. He was making a war out of one man, and he was doing it because, somewhere upstairs, a mother who had ridden 100 miles with a hole in her side was running on broken floorboards toward her child. Up on the 3rd floor, Clara reached the door at the end of the hall. She could hear Maggie crying inside. The door was locked. She did not knock. She did not call out. She put her shoulder against the wood and shoved, and the cheap hotel lock gave, and the door swung in, and there in the middle of the room stood a tall woman in black silk and pearls, with one bone-white hand on a 6-year-old child's shoulder. Clara. Mother. You should not have come. Take your hand off my daughter. Clara, dear. Take your hand off her, or I will put a bullet through your wrist, Mother. I will do it. Do not test me. Eleanor Ashford lifted her hand off Maggie's shoulder slowly. The little girl ran. She ran across that hotel room and into her mother's arms, and Clara dropped to one knee and caught her and held her, and the pistol stayed up the whole time pointed at Eleanor over Maggie's head. Mama! Mama! I'm here, baby. I'm here. Clara! Eleanor's voice was steady. Put the gun down. We will discuss this like family. We are not family. I am your mother. You are the woman who paid to make my daughter an orphan. Clara. You paid them, Mother. The men at the wagon, the fire in March, the man in the alley. You paid them. Don't you stand there in pearls and tell me you didn't. Eleanor's mouth tightened. I did what was necessary to bring my granddaughter home. Home. Yes, to a house where you sold my hand to the highest bidder when I was 19 years old. To a house where you told my husband he was beneath us. To a house where you locked me in my room for 3 days when I refused to give him up. That home, Mother. Clara, be reasonable. I am reasonable. I am the most reasonable woman in this room. I am giving you a chance. Mother and I will give you exactly one. You walk out that door behind me. You ride for St. Louis. You never come near my daughter again. You do that, and I will not put you in a Wyoming prison where you will die in a cell next to women who will not know who you are. You wouldn't. I will. You haven't the proof. I have a hired man tied to my porch in Wyoming who will swear to anything for a reduced sentence. I have a note in your handwriting pinned to my daughter's doll. I have a hotel ledger downstairs with your name in it. I have 3 witnesses in the lobby who saw you take Maggie up these stairs. I have all the proof I need. Eleanor was quiet a long moment. I confused money with blood, she said finally. You confuse love with weakness. No, Mother. Clara stood up. She kept the pistol level. I confuse nothing. I know exactly what love is. Love is a man who pulled my daughter out of a wash with a rusty knife pointed at his belly. Love is a man who sat up 3 nights to keep me breathing. Love is what's downstairs right now bleeding through his shirt to give me 5 minutes alone in this room with you. That is love, Mother. You wouldn't recognize it if it walked up and shook your hand. Out in the hall a board creaked. Clara did not turn. Eleanor's eyes flicked past her shoulder. Now, Clara. The man in the hall lifted his pistol. Clara felt him before she saw him. She turned, fired once, hit him in the thigh, and he went down screaming. She was already moving Maggie under her arm out the door, down the hall, down the back stairs. She came out into the alley with her daughter pressed against her chest, and her dress soaked through with her own blood from the reopened wound, and Ethan Cole was already there. Both Colts empty his left arm, hanging useless, his shirt black with blood. Mr. Cole? Get on the horse. You're hit. Get on the horse, ma'am. She got on the horse. He passed Maggie up to her. He swung up behind on Pilgrim and clutched at the saddle horn with his good hand. Ride. They rode. They did not stop for 10 miles. When they finally stopped in the cottonwoods by a creek 2 miles off the main road, Ethan slid off Pilgrim and went to one knee in the grass and could not get up. Clara was off her horse and over to him before his face hit the dirt. Ethan Cole, you stay with me. I'm here. You are not. Sir, you are gray as paper. I'm here, ma'am. I'm here. Maggie crawled into his lap. She was the one who was crying now, finally 3 weeks too late, the way a dam goes when it goes. She pressed her wet face against the side of his neck. Mr. Cole? Yes, miss. Don't die. I ain't planning on it, Maggie. Promise. He looked up at Clara. Clara was holding her own side. Clara had blood up to her wrist from the wound that had reopened on the stairs. Clara was looking at him the way nobody had looked at him in 10 long years. "I promise, miss," he said. And somewhere out behind them, 100 miles back in Cheyenne, an old woman in black silk was standing at a hotel window watching the dawn come up, and for the first time in her life, Eleanor Ashford understood that she was going to lose. A doctor came out of Cheyenne at noon. A young man named Holloway, pulled out of his bed by Nathaniel Boone himself, and he rode the 12 miles to that creek so hard his horse nearly foundered. He took one look at Ethan Cole and went pale. "Sir, I need to get this man on a wagon." "He's gonna live, ain't he?" Maggie said. Yes, miss, if we move him now." He promised. "He kept his promise so far, miss. Let's see if we can help him keep it the rest of the way." They got Ethan into the back of the buckboard Boone had brought. Clara rode beside him on the seat with the wound in her side packed fresh by the doctor's hands, and Maggie sat in the wagon bed with Ethan's head in her lap, and the little girl said almost nothing for the entire ride. But every quarter mile or so, she would lean down and whisper, "Don't die, Mr. Cole." "I ain't, miss." "You said." "I know I did." "Mama says liars go to hell." "Then I better tell the truth, hadn't I?" She did not laugh, but she did smile. It was the first smile she had given him with her whole face in it. Holloway worked on Ethan for 3 hours in the back room of Boone's office in Cheyenne. He took 2 pieces of lead out of him. He stitched the worst of the side wound shut. He told Boone quiet in the hallway, "That man should not be standing up in a court of law tomorrow. That man," Boone said, "is going to stand up in that court of law tomorrow if I have to nail his boots to the floor, because if he ain't there, that child gets handed over to the woman who hired 3 different sets of killers to make her an orphan. So you stitch him, doctor. You stitch him good. He stands up tomorrow." Holloway stitched him good. That night, Boone came into the back room with a piece of paper. "Ethan." "Nate. I've been thinking on this all afternoon." "On what?" "On the law. The court is going to hear this case tomorrow morning. Now I can fight Gideon Price on the question of unfit mother that ain't hard. Reverend Reed and Mrs. Turner alone will take that off the table. But Mrs. Ashford's got a card I can't beat, and you need to know what it is. Tell me. You ain't kin to that child." Ethan was quiet a moment. "I figured. The judge can give the child to her mother, sure. But the moment Clara goes back to that ranch with you with no marriage between you, the petition gets refiled in a week. And refiled, and refiled. Until something sticks. Until Clara dies of exhaustion. Until you take a bullet for real. Until that little girl ends up in St. Louis, whether her mother lives or dies." "What are you telling me, Nate?" "I'm telling you, Ethan, that the only legal wall a man can put between Eleanor Ashford and that child is to be the child's father. Not in the eyes of God. In the eyes of the law of the Wyoming Territory." Ethan stared at the ceiling a long time. "Send Clara in." "Ethan." "Send her in, Nate." Clara came in alone. She closed the door behind her. She sat down in the chair beside his cot and folded her hands in her lap and waited. "Ma'am?" "Yes." "Nate says we got a problem." "He told me. He tell you the fix. He told me." A long quiet stretched out between them. "Mrs. Whitfield?" "Yes." "I have not got down on one knee to a woman in 11 years. I am not going to start tonight because if I get down on one knee right now, ma'am, I will not get back up. So I am going to ask you sitting up, and I am going to ask you plain. Will you marry me before the courthouse opens tomorrow?" She did not answer for a moment. "Why?" "Ma'am, you know why. I want to hear you say it, Ethan Cole. To put the law between your daughter and the woman that bore you. To make me her father in the eyes of the territory. To give her a name that ain't on a list in St. Louis. To give you a man's roof over your head that no court in this country can knock down." "Is that all?" He looked at her. "No, ma'am." "Then say the rest." "I have not slept 3 nights in a row in 10 years, Mrs. Whitfield. The first night I slept clean through was the night I sat up in a chair while you was passing the fever." I closed my eyes around 4 in the morning, and I opened them at sunrise. And I was not afraid of what I'd see when I opened them. I had not had that morning in a decade. And I do not know what to call it, ma'am, except that I want 1,000 more of them, and I would like them to be in a house where you are also living, and I would like that little girl out there to have my name on her papers. That ain't a reason for marrying Ethan Cole. That's a reason for a man to be grateful. Ma'am? Yes? I am asking, will you marry me? Tonight, in Reverend Reed's office, with Nate Boone as our witness. She closed her eyes. Yes. Yes. Yes, sir, I will. Reverend Amos Reed married them at 10 o'clock that night by the light of 2 lamps in Boone's law office. Clara wore the dress she had ridden 100 miles in. Ethan stood up out of the cot and stayed standing the whole ceremony because he had told the doctor he would, and he had told Maggie he would, and a man's word was the only thing he owned out here. Maggie stood between them when they said the words. The Reverend gave her the ring to hold. She held it with both hands like she was carrying a baby chick. Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman? I do. Do you, Clara Whitfield, take this man? I do. By the authority vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, and by Almighty God, I pronounce you man and wife. The ring, miss. Maggie handed it up. Ethan slid it onto Clara's finger. He bent down. He kissed her once, quick, gentle on the mouth, and when he straightened up, he looked at the little girl between them. Maggie Whitfield. Yes, sir. You are now Maggie Cole, if you'll have the name. She thought about it. Mr. Cole? Yes, miss. Can I still keep Whitfield, too? You can keep every name you want, miss. They're yours. Maggie Whitfield Cole. That's a fine name. Yes, sir, she said. I reckon it is. The courthouse opened the next morning at 8, and Sheriff Briggs was waiting on the front steps when Boone's wagon pulled up. He had ridden in from the county the night before. He had with him 2 prisoners, the men Ethan had left tied to the porch, and a sworn deposition that he laid in Boone's hand without a word. Nate. Briggs. They sang. Both of them. Like canaries, Nate. They named names. They named the woman. They named her lawyer. They named the hotel in Cheyenne and the date the money changed hands. You bring all that paper inside. I aim to. Inside the courtroom, Eleanor Ashford was already seated. She wore black silk, the same as the night in the hotel, and her pearls, and a face that had been ironed flat by 60 years of getting her own way. Beside her sat Gideon Price, with his papers in a leather portfolio, and his pen in his hand, and his face the same blank sheet of writing paper it had always been. The judge was a man named Whitlock. He was 64 years old. He had been a soldier and a rancher and a circuit judge in this territory for 19 years, and he did not abide foolishness in his courtroom. Mr. Price. Your Honor. You may proceed. Gideon Price stood up. Your Honor, the petitioner, Mrs. Eleanor Ashford, asks this court to grant her custody of the minor child, Margaret Whitfield, on 3 grounds. First, that the child's mother, Clara Whitfield, is mentally unfit by reason of grief and exhaustion. Second, that the child's present guardian, Ethan Cole, is a man of documented violence. And third, and most pressingly, Your Honor, that the child is the heir to a substantial estate, and her welfare requires the supervision of a guardian capable of administering that estate. Mr. Price? Yes, Your Honor. You said guardian. You did not say grandmother. Your Honor, you came in here this morning representing a grandmother. Now you are representing a guardian. Which is it? Your Honor, the legal status. Mr. Price, sit down. Gideon Price sat down. Mr. Boone. Your Honor. You have a response. I have, Your Honor. I have 3 witnesses, 2 depositions, a sheriff's report, and a marriage certificate. A marriage certificate. Yes, Your Honor. Last night in the office of the Reverend Amos Reed in the city of Cheyenne, my client, Ethan Cole, was married to the child's mother, Clara Whitfield. The certificate is in this folder. Your Honor signed and witnessed and filed at the Territorial Clerk's office at 7 o'clock this morning. Mr. Cole is as of approximately 10 hours ago, the lawful stepfather of the child Margaret. A murmur went through the gallery. Eleanor's hand tightened on the rail in front of her. Whitlock looked at the certificate. He looked at Boone. He looked at Ethan Cole, who was sitting at the defendant's table with his left arm in a sling and his coat covering the bandages on his side, and who looked the judge straight in the eye without blinking. Mr. Cole, Your Honor, do you affirm that this marriage was entered into in good faith and with the intention of providing a permanent home for the woman and child? I do, Your Honor, and not solely for the purpose of defeating this petition. Your Honor, I will not lie to this court. The timing was forced. The reason was not. I have known Mrs. Cole, Mrs. Whitfield, as was for 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, she has slept under my roof, and I have slept in a chair beside her bed for 2 of them. I married her because I aim to be there for the rest of them, sir, as many as the Lord allows me. Whitlock studied him a long moment. Mr. Price, you may cross-examine. Gideon Price stood. He walked over to Ethan Cole. He smiled the smile of a man who had done this 1,000 times in better courtrooms than this one. Mr. Cole, Mr. Price, you broke a man's jaw in 3 places at the Drover's Saloon in Laramie 8 years ago. I did. Without warning. He give me warning enough. What warning? He told me my dead wife should have stayed in the kitchen where she belonged. I figure that's all the warning the world owes a man. A few people in the gallery laughed. Whitlock did not stop them. Mr. Cole. Yes, Mr. Price. You shot 2 men 3 nights ago. I did. Without warning. They was coming through my front door at 2 in the morning, sir, with the intent of murdering the woman and child sleeping inside. I figure the law allows a man 1 bullet apiece for that. And the men you wounded in the Drover's Hotel last week. Same answer, Mr. Price. They was paid by your client to take a 6-year-old child from her mother. I aimed for shoulders. They got shoulders. Mr. Cole, you are a violent man. Mr. Price, I am a man who has buried a wife and a son. I've been a quiet man. I've been a hard man. I've been a drunk man for a stretch I ain't proud of. But violent, sir, I have used violence to protect what's mine, and I have never used it for any other reason in this life. And if that disqualifies me from being that little girl's father, then I will sit down and I will let this court take her. But I will tell you, sir, that you will be handing her to the woman who paid for those men to come through my door, and that Mr. Price will be on your conscience, if you have one. Gideon Price went still. It was for less than a second, but Boone saw it, and Whitlock saw it, and Ethan saw it. The man's eyes flickered just once toward Eleanor Ashford at the petitioner's table. No further questions, Your Honor. Boone stood. Your Honor, I call Mrs. Clara Cole to the stand. Clara walked to the witness chair with her hand pressed against her side. Boone helped her sit. She lifted her right hand and took the oath in a voice that did not shake. Mrs. Cole, Mr. Boone, tell the court what happened on the road from Nebraska. She told it. She told it from the top plane without ornament. The men at the wagon, Samuel falling, the bullet in her own side, Maggie standing in the wash with the rusty knife, Ethan riding down off the rise, the night of the fever, the man at the loft window, the note pinned to the doll, the ride to Cheyenne, the room in the hotel, her mother's hand on her daughter's shoulder. When she got to that last part, her voice cracked for the first time and she had to stop. Whitlock waited. Take your time, Mrs. Cole. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Cole, I have one question. You have just accused your own mother of conspiring to murder your husband and abduct your child. Do you understand the gravity of that accusation? Yes, Your Honor. And you stand by it? Your Honor, I stand by it, and I will stand by it in any court in this country until the day I die. Eleanor Ashford did not move, but the color had gone out of her face entirely. No further questions, Boone said. Gideon Price stood. Then he sat back down. No questions, Your Honor. Whitlock raised an eyebrow. Mr. Price? Your Honor? You have nothing to ask Mrs. Cole. Your Honor, I know. Your Honor. The judge looked at him. The judge looked at Eleanor. The judge looked at the leather portfolio in Gideon Price's hand. He took a long breath. Mr. Boone. Your Honor. Call your next witness. I call Sheriff Owen Briggs, Your Honor. Briggs took the stand. He laid out the depositions of the two men he had captured. He named the date. He named the amount. $800. He named the man who had paid the money. The name was Gideon Price. The whole courtroom went still. Whitlock turned his head very slowly toward the petitioner's table. Mr. Price? Your Honor, these are the words of two known criminals. They will say anything. Mr. Price, are you aware that the Wyoming Territory considers conspiracy to commit murder a hanging offense? Your Honor. Are you aware, sir? Gideon Price looked at Eleanor Ashford. Eleanor Ashford looked at the floor. Your Honor. Yes, Mr. Price. I would like to request a recess. Denied. Your Honor, I would like to consult with my client. Denied. Mr. Price, you are an attorney of this territory, and you are facing an accusation that, if proven, will see you swing from a tree before the month is out. You are now going to make a choice in front of this court, and you are going to make it in the next 60 seconds. You will either sit down beside Mrs. Ashford and share her fate, or you will tell me the truth. A very long silence. Then Gideon Price set the leather portfolio on the table in front of him, and he opened it, and he took out a stack of letters, and he laid them down. I kept records, Your Honor. Eleanor's head came up like she'd been struck. Gideon? Madam, I am sorry. Gideon Price, I told you 15 years ago I would not take the fall for you. I told you I would not be the one who hangs. These are letters from Mrs. Ashford to me. They are dated. They are signed. They are explicit. They contain the names of the men hired, the amounts paid, and the instructions given. The courtroom erupted. Whitlock pounded his gavel. Once. Twice. The room went quiet. Mr. Price. Your Honor. Approach the bench. He approached. He laid the letters down. Whitlock read the first one. He read the second. He looked up. Sheriff Briggs. Your Honor. Take Mrs. Eleanor Ashford into custody on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and conspiracy to interfere with the lawful custody of a minor child. Mr. Price, you will surrender yourself as a material witness and accomplice. You will not leave this territory without my written permission. Yes, Your Honor. Eleanor stood up. Clara. Clara did not turn around. Clara Eliza. Clara turned. Mother, you cannot do this to me. I am not doing anything to you, Mother. You did this to yourself the day you decided that money was the same thing as love. I am your mother. Yes, Clara said, and I am hers, and that is the whole difference between us. Briggs put his hand on Eleanor Ashford's elbow, and she let him lead her out, and she did not look back, and the door of the courtroom closed behind her with a sound like the closing of a book. Whitlock cleared his throat. Counsel. Your Honor. There remains the matter of the petition. Yes, Your Honor. And there remains the matter of the inheritance. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Cole, stand up, please. Ethan stood. Mr. Cole, I am not granting custody to your wife today. Not yet. Because I have a question to ask you both first, and the answer is going to determine what kind of family this court believes you to be. Yes, Your Honor. This child stands to inherit, by my count of what's been entered into evidence, $80-some thousand in gold plus shares plus property. That money is the reason her father is dead. That money is the reason her grandmother is in chains. That money is, by my reckoning, a curse. So I am going to ask you, sir, and I am going to ask your wife, and your answers are going to be entered into the record. Are you prepared to sign over all administration of that estate to an independent guardian to be appointed by this court with no access to the principal by either of you for any purpose whatsoever until the child reaches the age of 21? Clara was already standing. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Cole, I have not asked you yet. I'm answering anyway, Your Honor. Yes, every penny of it. Today. Now. I will sign whatever you put in front of me. Mr. Cole. Ethan looked at Whitlock. Your Honor, a child is not a bank account. I did not marry that woman for an estate. I did not stitch her side at 3 in the morning for a freight company. I did not ride 100 miles with 2 bullets in me for a house in St. Louis. I do not want 1 penny of that money. I do not want my name on 1 share of that company. Put it in a trust. Lock it up. Throw away the key. Give it to the child the day she turns 21 and let her decide what kind of woman she wants to be with it. That is my answer, Your Honor. Whitlock looked at him a long moment. Mr. Cole, Your Honor. In 19 years on this bench, I have heard a great many men tell me what they want. You are the first one in memory who has stood in front of me and told me what he does not want. The court appreciates the rarity. Yes, Your Honor. Custody of the minor child, Margaret Whitfield Cole, is granted to her mother, Mrs. Clara Cole, with Mr. Ethan Cole recognized as lawful stepfather. The estate of the late Samuel Whitfield will be placed in independent trust per the terms just stated. The petition of Mrs. Eleanor Ashford is dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Boone. Your Honor, there is one more matter. Your Honor, the court would like to hear from the child. Your Honor, she is 6 years old. Mr. Boone, the court would like to hear from the child. Maggie came up the aisle holding her mother's hand. She climbed into the witness chair by herself. The chair was too big. Her feet did not touch the floor. Miss. Yes, sir. My name is Judge Whitlock. Do you know what a courtroom is? It's where you decide who folks belong with. That is a very fine answer. Now I am going to ask you only one question, and you may answer it any way you like. Where do you feel safe, Miss Cole? She thought about it. She looked at her mother. She looked at Ethan. She looked back at the judge. At the ranch, sir. At the ranch. Yes, sir. When Mr. Cole is home, the dark don't come all the way in. The judge sat very still for several seconds. Miss Cole? Yes, sir. You may step down. She climbed out of the chair. She walked back across that courtroom with her chin up, and she did not stop at her mother, and she did not stop at Boone, and she walked all the way across to the defendant's table, and she climbed up in Ethan Cole's lap, and she put both her arms around his neck, and she pressed her face into his collar. Ethan put his good arm around her, and he closed his eyes, and he held that little girl in a courtroom in Cheyenne, Wyoming, on the 17th day of August, 1873. He did not say a word. He did not need to. Outside, a wagon was waiting to take them home. The ride back took 2 days. Ethan could not sit a horse. Clara would not let him try. They put him in the bed of the wagon on a folded quilt, and Maggie curled up beside him under his good arm, and Clara drove the team herself. About sundown of the second day, with the ranch maybe 4 miles ahead and the smell of sage rising up off the cooling ground, Clara reined the team to a stop. Mr. Cole? Mrs. Cole, I want to say something, and I want you to let me say it without interrupting. Yes, ma'am. You married me to put a wall between my daughter and my mother. Yes, ma'am. And the wall worked. The wall is up. The marriage has done what it was meant to do. Yes, ma'am. So I am telling you, Ethan Cole, you can ride into Cheyenne next month, and you can go to the territorial clerk, and you can have that marriage annulled. Any judge in Wyoming will sign it. The wall stays because Maggie's name is on the papers now, and that don't come undone. But you don't owe me a wife. You owe me nothing. You have given me my daughter back. That is more than any man has ever given me. You may go on with your life as a free man, sir, and I will not stand in your way for 1 minute. Ethan looked up at her from the wagon bed. Clara. Yes. The marriage was protection. Yes. It became a home about 4 hours after the Reverend said the words. Ethan, drive the wagon, Mrs. Cole. There's a child asleep on my arm, and there's a porch light 4 miles away that I aim to sit on tonight, with my wife. She drove the wagon. She did not speak for a long while, but when the ranch came up out of the dusk with the cabin dark against the last orange of the sky and the barn standing where it had stood for 11 years, and Boots the half-coyote dog already running across the yard barking like he'd known they were coming the whole time, Clara Cole reached down behind her, and she put her hand on her husband's hand, and he closed his fingers around hers, and the wagon rolled in through the gate of a place that was no longer a house where one man had lived alone with his ghosts. It was a home, and the dark did not come all the way in. The wound in Ethan's side took 6 weeks to close, and the wound in his arm took 8, and the wound in his chest, the one no doctor could see, the one that had been bleeding quiet for 10 years, that one started healing. The morning he woke up in his own bed and heard a child laughing in his own yard. The first month after the trial was a strange one. Ethan was not a man built for being still. The doctor in Cheyenne had told him plain, "You ride a horse before October, sir, and you'll tear that side wide open, and you'll bleed out in a ditch alone." And so he sat on his own porch with a blanket across his knees, while Clara and the hired boy from the next ranch over did the chores he had done by himself for 11 years. He hated it. He hated every minute of it. Maggie sat with him most days. She would climb up onto the porch with boots at her heels and a book in her hand, and she would read to him out loud, slow, careful sounding out the hard words. She had not known her letters when she came to the ranch. Clara had taught her in the evenings, 6 weeks now, 2 hours every night by the lamp at the kitchen table. "Mr. Cole?" "Yes, miss." "What's this word?" "That's prairie, miss." "Prairie." "Yes. It's our word." "Yes, Maggie, it is." She read him the whole afternoon. He listened with his eyes closed. He did not sleep. He just listened. Clara came out at sundown with 2 cups of coffee and sat down in the chair beside him and laid her head against his shoulder, and that was the 3rd week. "Ethan." "Yes, ma'am." "The doctor sent word." "From Cheyenne." "From Cheyenne." "And?" "My mother goes to trial the 2nd week of October. The territorial prosecutor wants me to testify, wants Maggie to testify." "Maggie ain't testifying." "No. Not while she's 6. No. You go. I go with you. We leave Maggie with Mrs. Turner." "Yes." "That's settled. That's settled." She drank her coffee. "Ethan." "Yes." "I've been carrying something a long time." "All right. I want to put it down tonight." "All right." "Samuel," she said. "He died telling me to live." "I never told you that. I held him on the floor of the wagon and the bullet was in his back, and he told me to take Maggie and run, and I told him I would not leave him, and he said, Clara, you live. You live for both of us." Ethan sat very still. "And I have been alive these 3 months, Ethan Cole. I have been alive, and I do not know how to thank a dead man for telling me to live, and I do not know how to thank a living man for showing me what it looks like." Clara. "Yes. You don't thank either of us. You just live. That's all he asked. That's all I'm asking." "I aim to." "Good." She drank her coffee. "Ethan." "Yes, ma'am." "I think I'm carrying a baby." He turned his head so fast his side pulled, and he winced, and Clara laughed. And it was a real laugh, the first real laugh he had heard out of her in 3 months, and then she was crying, and then she was laughing again, and she was holding both his hands. "You sure, Mrs. Cole?" "I'm sure." "How sure?" 2 months sure." "Lord." "I know." "Lord, Clara." "I know." "That ain't possible. We've been married 6 weeks." "I know." "Then how?" "Ethan Cole, I am 31 years old. I have been a wife once before. I know how I know." He sat there. He looked at her. He looked at the porch boards. He looked at the sky. He looked at the door of the cradle room, the door that had been locked for 10 years and unlocked now for 3 months, and he thought about the cradle that was sitting in there, finished, sanded smooth, the rocker mended, waiting. He thought about Sarah. He thought about Thomas. He waited for the grief to come up and choke him the way it always had. It did not come. What came was a different thing. It was not a forgetting. It would never be a forgetting. It was that the grief had finally made room in the chair beside it for something else. "Clara." "Yes." "I am going to be all right." "I know you are." "No, listen. I am going to be all right. I have not been all right since 63, and I am going to be all right." "I know, Ethan." He pressed his forehead against hers. You tell Maggie. Not yet. Tell her tonight. Yes. Tell her at supper. Yes. Tell her her papa knows. Her papa. He closed his eyes. Yes, ma'am. Her papa. Maggie was told at supper. She sat very still while Clara explained it. She did not say anything for a long time. She looked at her plate. She looked at the lamp. She looked at Ethan. Mr. Cole? Yes, miss. Will it be a boy or a girl? I don't reckon anybody knows that, miss. If it's a boy, what'll you call him? Ethan set his fork down. I had a boy once, Maggie. I know. His name was Thomas. I know. I would like very much to call this one a different name. I would like to call him Samuel. The little girl looked at him. Her eyes filled up finally, 3 months too late, the way a slow rain finds a dry field. After my papa. After your papa. You'd do that. Yes, miss. Why? Because your papa told your mama to live, miss, and he didn't live to see it. So this baby is going to carry his name into the years he didn't get. That's why. She climbed down out of her chair. She came around the table. She climbed up into Ethan's lap. She put her arms around his neck. Papa. Yes, miss. I love you. He could not answer her for a moment. I love you too, Maggie. I love you a lot. I love you a lot too. I love you more than the dog. That's a powerful lot, miss. I know. They went to Cheyenne in October. The trial of Eleanor Ashford lasted 4 days. Clara testified on the second day. She wore a black dress, and she did not cry, and she told the court the same thing she had told Whitlock 6 weeks before. Plain and without ornament. And the jury believed her because she did not weep, and because she did not raise her voice, and because she answered every question Gideon Price's replacement attorney threw at her with the same flat, terrible calm. Eleanor was found guilty. She was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison at Laramie. She did not look at Clara when the sentence was read. She looked at the wall behind the judge. She had spent her whole life looking past her daughter at something else, and she did it for the last time on the day she was sentenced. Clara walked out of that courthouse, and she did not cry until she was 3 miles outside Cheyenne, in the back of the wagon, with Ethan's arm around her and her head against his chest, and then she cried for an hour straight, and Ethan let her. He had buried a wife. He had buried a son. He knew what it cost a person to bury a parent who was still breathing. Ethan. Yes, ma'am. It's done. It's done. I never have to see her again. No, ma'am, you don't. Then why does it hurt this bad? Because she was your mother. She was a monster. She was both. People are. You're allowed to grieve the part of her that should have been a mother. Clara wept against his chest the rest of the way home. By the time the wagon rolled in through the ranch gate, the worst of it had passed. Maggie ran out of the cabin barefoot to meet them. She was carrying a piece of paper. She was waving it like a flag. Mama, Papa, I wrote my name. Did you miss? I wrote it 3 times. Mrs. Turner showed me. Look. She held the paper up. There it was in big crooked letters. Maggie, Maggie, Maggie. And look, I wrote the new one too. Below the 3 Maggies in letters even bigger and even more crooked, 4 words, Maggie Whitfield Cole. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth. Ethan got down off the wagon, and he took the paper from the little girl, and he folded it in half once, and he folded it in half again, and he put it inside his coat against his heart. This here is the finest piece of writing I have ever seen, Miss Cole. It's not a real piece of writing, Papa, it's just my name. There ain't a finer piece of writing in this territory than your name, miss. There ain't a finer piece of writing in this country. The baby came in May. It was a boy, and they called him Samuel, the way they had said they would. He was small and red and angry, and he slept on Ethan's chest most nights for the first 3 weeks of his life, because Clara was tired, and Ethan was not, and Ethan would sit on the porch in the rocking chair from the cradle room, and he would hold that baby against his collarbone, and he would feel the small breath going in and out against his shirt, and he would think, "Lord, you waited a long time to give me this, but you gave it to me and I will not waste a minute of it." Maggie was a different child by then. She was 7. She had grown 3 inches over the winter. She talked all the time. She sang to the baby. She named every chicken in the yard. She rode a pony of her own that Ethan had bought her in Cheyenne. She still had nightmares, not every night, not even every week, but sometimes in the deep summer, when the heat reminded her of the wash. When she did, she would come down the loft ladder in her nightdress, and she would stand in the bedroom doorway, and Ethan would say without opening his eyes, "Get on in here, miss." And she would climb up on the foot of the bed and curl up at her mother's feet like a cat, and the dog would come up after her, and they would all sleep that way until morning. Samuel was 4 months old when Ethan rode out to the wash. He went alone. He took 2 shovels he didn't need. He took a handful of wildflowers Maggie had picked and put in his hand at the gate. He took his hat off when he got there the way he had a year and a half ago, and he stood at the cross he had carved with his own hatchet, and the cross was still standing, and the wood had gone gray, and the grass had grown over the place where Samuel Whitfield's body had gone into the ground. "Samuel." He laid the wildflowers at the foot of the cross. "I've been meaning to come out here for a while." He stood quiet. "You got a son. He's 4 months old. He's healthy. He's loud. Maggie sings to him. Clara is a fine mother. She always was, but she is one again, and that is partly your doing. Partly mine. Mostly hers. She is a strong woman, Samuel. The strongest I have known." The wind moved across the wash. "I named the boy after you. I wanted to tell you that to your face, even if your face is in the ground. You raised a girl who held a knife on a stranger to save her mama. That girl saved my life, Samuel. I want you to know that. I had been a dead man for 10 years, and your daughter put me back in the world. So I owe you a debt I can't pay. The best I can do is raise her up and raise the boy up and love your wife the way she ought to have been loved her whole life and tell them about you. They will know you, Samuel Whitfield. The boy will know your name. The girl will remember your face. I give you my word." He stood there a long time. "Rest easy, mister." He put his hat back on. He swung up onto Pilgrim. He rode home. And when he came up over the last rise and saw the ranch with the smoke coming straight up out of the chimney and the laundry on the line and Boots barking at something in the yard, he saw Clara sitting on the porch with the baby in her arms, and Maggie running out of the barn with both hands full of fresh eggs hollering across the yard at the top of her lungs. "Papa, supper's getting cold." He reined up on the rise. He sat there a moment. For most of his life, Ethan Cole had believed that loving a thing was a way of giving the world a stick to beat you with. He had believed that the strong man was the man who held nothing in his hand because nothing in his hand could be taken. He had believed it the day he buried his wife. He had believed it the day he buried his son. He had believed it riding alone across that prairie 3 summers in a row, and he had believed it the morning he heard a child scream in a dry wash. And he had believed it every step of the way, until a 6-year-old girl with a rusty knife told him she would kill him if he touched her mama. He did not believe it anymore. He had been wrong. A man does not love because he is strong. A man becomes strong because he loves. The world is going to take and take and take, and there is no stick it can hold that is worse than the stick of standing alone on a porch for 10 years with no living thing to call your own. The thing worth fearing is not the loving. The thing worth fearing is the dying without ever having dared. He had dared. He clucked his tongue at Pilgrim, and the horse stepped down off the rise, and he rode in toward the lit windows of his own house with the last of the day going gold across the plain. Clara stood up from the porch with Samuel on her hip. Maggie dropped 2 of her eggs in her hurry to get to the gate. Boots barked. The chickens scattered. The smoke went up. Ethan Cole came home, and he was not alone, and he was never going to be alone again, and the house behind him would for as many years as the Lord allowed him hold the breath of a wife and a daughter and a son and a half-coyote dog, and the steady warm light that comes from a hearth that has people gathered around it. That is the end of the story. A man who had buried his family rode out one summer afternoon, believing he had nothing left to lose, and he came on a child in a dry wash with a rusty knife, and the child saved him as much as he saved her. He learned that family is not a thing the blood gives you. Family is a thing you build board by board, the way a man builds a house with sweat and patience and bandages and long nights and broken sleep and somebody else's name on your papers and somebody else's child in your arms. Family is what you are willing to bleed for. Family is what is willing to bleed for you. Eleanor Ashford died in the Laramie prison 3 years later. Clara did not go to the funeral. She sent a single letter to be buried with the body. Nobody but Clara ever knew what was in that letter, and nobody ever asked. Ethan and Clara had 2 more children after Samuel, a girl named Sarah, after Ethan's first wife, because Clara insisted, and a boy named Amos after the reverend who had married them by the light of 2 lamps in a Cheyenne law office. Maggie grew up tall and strong and stubborn, and she rode a horse better than any man in the county, and when she turned 21, she walked into the Territorial Bank and signed the papers her mother had signed 20 years before, and she gave half of the inheritance to a home for orphan children in Cheyenne and put the other half into the ranch, and she said the only thing she said all day, which was Papa. This here's so we don't ever have to sell the back 40. She married a young rancher from out near Casper when she was 23. Ethan walked her down the aisle. He cried finally, after 60 years of not crying. Clara held his arm and led him. He lived to be 78. On the last night of his life, with all of his children grown, and most of his grandchildren in the next room, he asked Clara to bring him out onto the porch one more time. She wrapped him in a blanket and walked him out, and he sat in the rocking chair he had built for Thomas's cradle 52 years before, and he looked across his own land in the last of the evening light. Clara. Yes. It was a good life. It was Ethan Cole. I would not change a minute of it. Not a minute, not one. Not even that. Because if I had not lost what I lost, I would not have ridden the long way around the wagon road that afternoon. I would not have heard her scream. I would not have come down off that rise. Ethan? Yes. I love you. I know it, Mrs. Cole. I have loved you since the night you sat up keeping count for my daughter. I know it. I will love you on the other side. I will be waiting. He died about an hour later with her hand in his, and a 6-year-old great-granddaughter named Maggie asleep on his lap, and the porch light burning steady against the dark. The dark did not come all the way in. It never did again. This is the story of a man who thought he had nothing left, and a child who put a knife between him and the world, and a mother who rode 100 miles with a hole in her side to take her daughter back. It is the story of how a house with no light in any window for 10 long summers became a home with light in every window for 50 years more. It is the story of what love costs and what love builds, and why a man is a fool to fear the cost when the building is what he was put on this earth to do. Family is not given. Family is chosen. Family is fought for. And the family that is fought for is the family that lasts. That is the whole of it. That is the end.